Hello and welcome to the Overland Journal podcast. I'm your host, Scott Brady, and I have a very exciting guest for today. Personally, I am incredibly honored to have Tom Sheppard with me on the podcast. Tom has been someone that I have admired since the very first days as an overland traveler for me. I remember walking into the Land Rover dealership in Scottsdale and seeing this book that said Vehicle Dependent Expedition Guide. And I remember my hands nearly trembling as I was asking the service counter person if it was actually for sale, and it was. And I still have that book today, and I have since purchased all of his other volumes. We worked with Tom on bringing the Vehicle Dependent Expedition Guide into the United States. His expeditions are considered some of the most effectively planned and executed in history. Some of these big ones were done before GPS, before modern communication and navigation. So they would use a sun compass, and they crossed the entire length of the Sahara, all off track from coast to coast. Tom Sheppard is also an incredible photographer. He has a lot of passion for Northern Africa and has traveled there extensively. And he's also had a wide range of vehicles, and every single one of them he prepares in nearly the same way, with a great deal of simplicity and minimalism to his approach. There is a lot to learn from Tom. He's about to celebrate his 90th birthday. A huge happy birthday to Tom. This was such a joy for me to do. I'm so grateful that we had the chance to sit down and talk with Tom Sheppard. And a special thanks to Rocky Talkies for their support of this week's podcast. Rocky Talkies are backcountry radios designed by a small team in Denver. The radios are extremely rugged, easy to use, and compact, weighing in at just under 8 ounces. They have a range of 1 to 5 miles in the mountains and up to 25 miles line of sight. The batteries will last from 3 to 5 days, and you can recharge them easily via USB-C right in the vehicle. Our team uses Rocky Talkies, and we also used them recently at the Overland Expo. The next Overland Expo, stop into our booth and say hello and check out the radios for yourself. And as a listener of the Overland Journal podcast, you can get 10% off a pair by going to rockytalkie.com/Overland Journal. Thanks again, Rocky Talkie. Tom, it's very humbling for me to be sitting here with you because you're someone that I truly admire. Yeah. And I'm grateful that we get to tell your story to the people that listen to the Overland Journal podcast.
Very reassuring, actually, to hear your reaction when you got the book or when you first saw it, which it helps me.
It filled me with wonder, Tom. Yeah. It truly did. Yeah. Just from the cover image, I remember the first image that I saw that has stuck in my mind was a photograph. I believe it was of the Range Rover being craned onto a ship.
Yes.
And I remember it as if I saw it 10 minutes ago. Yeah. Because again, it's those kinds of experiences that you've had that we're all seeking for. We're seeking for this adventure.
Yeah, that was the Range Rover that broke the track rod, actually. Yeah. As we will see.
Yeah.
So a surprise in store for me.
So I'd like to start from your military career. So you had a full career as a fighter pilot. And how long were you in the British Air Force?
I was in the RAF for 25 years. Uh-huh. I started off at Cranwell, which is very lucky to get in there. That's the Royal Air Force College, where they train career officers. And I came out of there and went onto a fighter squadron. And as a Cranwell graduate, they tend to give you a series of challenging jobs anyway. So again, you benefit from that. Yeah. And then I went into squadron, went onto the, as well as being a pilot, I was also what they call the Sea Flight Commander, which looked after the technical side as well, which had broadened my horizons quite a lot.
Well, and I can see that not only that discipline around being a pilot, but what you would have gained for insights around planning and logistics in that position of leadership. I suspect that helped your future expeditions.
It did. In point of fact, when I was in Cyprus, that was the first thing that I applied myself to, was getting a sort of mobility plan. There were Beverleys and Hastings aircraft, cargo aircraft. And if we deployed anywhere, we would have to have X number of items of technical equipment and gun packs and all kind of stuff. And I made plans of these aircraft. And sure enough, I can't even remember why we went there actually, but we deployed to Jordan, just over the road, from Cyprus. It wasn't exactly the dark side of the moon.
Yeah, sure.
But we went there, and suddenly in the middle of the night, the flight commander came and said, "Hey, you still got those drawings?" I said, "Well, yeah, I have, as a matter of fact, yeah." And off we went. And it worked.
I guess the first expedition that I'd like to talk about is one of the most notable ones that you've completed, which was the first successful west to east crossing of the entire Sahara from ocean to ocean.
Yes.
And what inspired that trip?
Yeah, by that time, I had done a large number of desert trips in the Sahara in particular. And that's right. I remember now. It's all coming back to me. Yes, some things do come back to you eventually. And it was, can't remember the chap's name now, but a Frenchman who had gone into what he named as the Mauritanian empty quarter. Okay. And that was sort of like terra incognito, really. And no one had sort of been right across it. And I thought, hey, wouldn't it be great to go across there? And carry on. And then I was searching for you can't do that just for the hell of it. It's a pretty expensive hobby. Yeah. I thought, well, what can we do that's useful? And I contacted all manner of people, universities and the Royal Geographical Society and so on. And they came up, I can't remember how it arose now, but anyway, it turned out that there hadn't been a complete coast-to-coast gravity survey done before. And that was how I met up with Jeff Renner, who was the scientist on the trip, as well as he was British Antarctic Survey, so he knew all about operating in remote areas and teamwork and all that kind of stuff, but he was immaculately thorough in what he did. And while we were all buzzing about, getting bogged or unbogged or being cooked or sorting out the water or whatever, Jeff was there looking. We used to pull his leg, actually, because a gravimeter is a device of enormous value, frighteningly expensive. It came in a shockproof, vibration-proof box. Makes sense. Sure. And when he put it on the ground, he had to put it on the ground, then he had to look through. And we used to pull his leg, but he was looking through to the devil. But he went on and he got this, it was unique. He got recognition from the Royal Geographical Society. Yeah. So that was how the scientific aspect of the trip came. Well, and that genuinely, I think, shifts from an overland adventure to an expedition once you've either incorporated some degree of scientific weight to the trip, or you're providing some medical support. You're doing some greater good than just being like I do, which is I tend to most of the time just be an adventurer mucking about. No law against that. No. But it's genuine, these expeditions that you've done, because they incorporated so many other things. Like, for example, you worked with UNESCO on the cave art and the rock art. Yeah, that was after one of my trips a number of my trips to Libya. It occurred to me that there were these cave paintings there all around the Jebel Uwainat, which is we used to call it Nasser's Corner, because on our aircraft we couldn't go across Egypt, so we flew around that to get to Sudan, Khartoum. That mountain there, Jebel Uwainat and Arkenu, were absolutely alive. I mean, literally alive with cave paintings, rock art, carvings, and that kind of thing, all around the place. Incredible. And what that really said to you about the history of that place was indicated by the carvings themselves. There was one. There are lots of carvings of cattle, long-hauled cattle, and giraffes, which is fascinating. Which indicates what it had been like in the past. I mean, when we went through there, when I went there on my first visit in 1960, and I did another 2 visits after that, it was very barren. There was a spring. There was still a spring there, and in fact, on the first Yes, the first trip I went down there were actually some people living there.
Ah, interesting.
So they were heaven knows how, carving out a living. Equally, though, it was on a traffic route from northern Sudan into Libya, which were a lot of labor went that way, and trucks went there.
Yeah, sure.
And there was a customs post and guards and so on and so forth on the corner.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Looking back at that 1975 Trans-Sahara expedition, what were some of the key learnings that you had? Because that is such an ambitious undertaking.
Well, you're right. There was some learning to do and some preparation to do. And what that involved, I thought it would be smart to do a reconnaissance. I'd heard about the Mauritanian empty quarter, and it sounded a bit of a challenge. This was 1973. Now, my first trip in the desert had been in 1960 with the Royal Air Force Regiment. That was my very first trip. And the Libyan sand sea was a nice sand sea because the sand was friendly in as much as it wasn't so soft and fine and not so sort of quite as wind blown. Well, it was wind formed, but not wind blown. It behoved, having heard what Mauritania was like, I thought we'd better go and take a sniff at this. And the question of the long range, how can you
carry enough fuel?
800 miles, have you got enough fuel to do that? What vehicles are we going to use? A nice agile vehicle like the Range Rover would go there like a bunny rabbit, but it would run out of fuel about a third of the way across. A 4-ton truck would carry the load, but it was a bit of the power weight ratio wasn't up to it, and so on. So basically what we did in 1973, I might add, and I couldn't have done this without the sponsorship of the RAF. The RAF recognized the benefit to servicemen per se of organizing expeditions in challenging conditions, such as the desert, and logistically challenging conditions and that kind of thing. So to cut a long story short, I managed to persuade the RAF to obtain a Bedford 4-ton truck that we could use as comparison A. Comparison B was the 110 Land Rover, which was a kind of 1 ton, about 3/4 ton, but all the loaders over the back axle. Then there was the Range Rover, which would go there like a bunny rabbit, but it wouldn't carry the fuel. So enter stage left, RAF Hercules aircraft, into which we would cram these vehicles. Oh, no, you won't, said the man. Why not? I said, because they won't fit. So what we had to do then was to take the wheels off the Land Rover, put the Land Rover onto the top, put the Land Rover on top of the Bedford truck, then take the wheels off to lower it down so it didn't hit the roof, and then take the Bedford truck with the Land Rover in, and then the Range Rover in behind that. So off we went. And we landed at a place called Arak, where the Mauritanians, lovely people, and no less so were their soldiers and gendarmes and all the rest of it. So we landed one day at Arak. The message, of course, hadn't actually got through that we were coming. So here we are, a foreign invading force, complete with MC and all the rest of it. All right. And these lovely Mauritanian soldiers coming up and saying, hey, what can we do for you? So there was a certain amount of negotiation went on. But to cut a long story, we got about, I suppose, 200 miles into the empty quarter, not without some problems, of course. Inevitably, the Range Rover galloping ahead, on deflated tires and so on. The Land Rover hacking it, but with certain problems due to the load distribution, and still 3/4 ton, not taking enough fuel. And the Bedford carrying, a million jerry cans and the food in the kitchen and so on and so forth. That managing it in 4-wheel drive, but having to be towed every now and then, tandem towed, Range Rover at the front, Land Rover, Bedford. All together, whoomph, and then out it came. So we had several of those, and that gave me a very good idea of what the terrain was going to be like, and formed my idea then as to the kind of vehicles that we needed.
And just happens to be that Land Rover released a new vehicle.
Just happened. I couldn't believe my luck. I heard about that because we looked at the 110 Land Rover and said, no, he isn't going to do it. And the and the power weight ratio on the Bedford wasn't any. But just at that time, the FBRD, Fighting Vehicles Research and Development Unit, had passed for production the forward control Land Rover 101, which, being built for air dropping, was very lightweight. The cockpit was an ergonomic catastrophe, actually,
Sure.
because there was about 50 ways you could cut yourself or bruise your leg or something like that. The steering wheel was about this, but it did the job. And the main payload, which comprised 4 45-gallon drums, that's 400-liter drums of fuel, could sit right in the middle between the front axle and the rear axle. Ideal weight distribution.
For sure.
No problem at all. All strapped down and so on and so forth.
And they were V8s, were they?
Sorry?
Were they V8s?
Yes, they were. Yeah.
Okay.
V8 engine.
So you got some power to
sitting
weight
like
ratio.
there to the driver.
Sure.
And warming him appropriately in the sun. And there was even, by then further stripping it down, taking the top off, taking the windscreen off and all that kind of thing, we could mount a sun compass, which is what we were using as the principal navigation aid. Mount the sun compass right there, free to get the sun for the shadow, for the gnomon, and navigate with, and for the driver to see. So it was an ideal setup.
For those that are watching on YouTube, you'll see these images that we were able to get from Tom that show the sun compass, which this would have all been pre-GPS. Did you also use any celestial navigation?
Yes, we did. That was the thing. I had a great friend of mine, Phil May, who was then a corporal in the army, the British Army, down in Salisbury, and he taught navigation.
Oh, wow.
To people, and he was as bright as a button. Very, very sharp indeed, and a really nice guy, very calm, very proficient. We had him as the overseer on the astro shots. Yeah. Star shots, you would have to have at least three star shots to get a fix.
Yeah,
now, as often as not, I mean, when on my subsequent trip, I was, if you got one or two of them cocked up, something like that, you'd have to do another one. You would spend all night doing them. And I was taking on my later trip in 78, I was being less proficient than Phil. I was doing anything up to 5 or 6 star shots to try and get a decent cocked out. The intersection lines of the 3 position lines had to make a small topped hat, as we called it.
Sure. The sun compass would essentially give you a bearing, which is what you were primarily navigating.
Yes, that's right. With the ingenuity of the sun compass, it is actually beyond praise. The Coles, I don't know very much about Mr. Coles, but he deserves to go down in history. All the instructions were on the face of the compass. You could give it to a chimpanzee and you say, oh yeah, no, time of year, time of day, sun time, Greenwich Mean Time, this kind of thing. You set it up, all on the face of the sun compass. Slide the gnomon up and down, move it round to the heading you wanted, drive with the compass on the movable reference item, and there you are. You had to be careful that every 15 minutes, as the sun went round, you had to change.
Sure.
So in fact, technically, you were not going in a straight line. You were going in a series of shallow arcs.
Sure.
But you were getting there, and it was dead accurate.
Incredible. And I think about today, the luxuries that we have for travel. I can navigate by GPS. I can have I showed you this morning on Gaia GPS, all these layers of maps.
No law against it.
Well, yeah, but it is fascinating. And to me, it just shows, how much more proficient you had to be, because you were going into, there was not even any satellite communication. You would have probably UHF radios would be the extent.
Yeah, it was sort of long-wave radio, actually. And we had to mount aerials and everything else. And we had a chap there, Kevin, who could do the Morse code and all, all very professional and everything else.
Incredible.
So we kept in touch with the people at home there.
When you finished that trip, what were the couple of either modifications to the vehicle or equipment that you brought along that you thought, this is very special, I'm going to use it from now on? Was there anything that you really...
I think it reaffirmed my faith in the sun compass. It proved, why wouldn't it, the validity of having sound astro shots as backup. It emphasized the fact that you couldn't get good astro shots if there was cloud.
Sure.
Had to double back on most things.
Yeah.
There. But navigation wise, I mean, again, to do the astro shots, you had a pack of books about that deep and about that long, little tables, the
Sure.
astro tables. The mind boggles as to who wrote the books
It's impressive.
wrote in inverted commas.
Impressive.
Somebody had to do the mathematics for all that.
Yeah.
But,
Truly impressive.
yeah.
And then you think about Shackleton and his crew in this tiny dory.
Oh, that's right.
Going across the ocean, somehow taking these headings.
That's right. Yeah, with
Unbelievable.
cold hands and the climatic problems they had were about 4 times what we had.
Truly.
Sure, we had very high temperatures, but it was livable. You could work.
Yeah. The men and women who've come before us and what they've accomplished is just truly
That's
unbelievable.
right. Yeah.
So you finished this very notable expedition, and it received high praise. It was even used in Rolex advertisements, and it was documented well. In fact, there's a great video.
Royal Geographical Society gave me the Ness Award, which I was really quite happy about. Team event, but
sure.
they gave it to me. But yeah.
And then there was a video that came out on that. I've seen it. It's quite good.
As well as leading the trip, I was also the chief cinematographer. So I had to went with Jeff down to again. It was an army unit down in the south of England to learn the tenets of shooting films and cutaways and zoom shots and, trying to get things in perspective. And above all, in the desert, keeping the cameras clean.
So difficult.
And keeping the sand out.
Yeah.
I was very pleased to note that Anglia Television, as it was then, when they got the film, they said, "We can't believe how clean this is." And I would spend actually about an hour in the afternoon with a squasher, with blowing sand off the lenses and making sure that and then we had to keep the film cool. The film stock had to be kept cool, and then when it was exposed, it had to be kept cool, and then it had to be mailed out of the country. The first thing was after the empty quarter crossing, when we got down to Kano, we put a whole stack of film in the post and prayed that it would get through and everything else.
And it did.
It did. It got through.
Fantastic.
You can imagine the customs people, what's this, but it got through.
Unbelievable.
And we shot some more footage along the way and mailed that back from Khartoum and again from Cairo, because we had to get the inevitable shot by the pyramids.
It's a wonderful film, and I have found it a few times on YouTube. It's great.
Oh really? Yeah. Oh god.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Fame at last. YouTube.
Well, and speaking of cinematography and photography, one of the things that the initial impression is, of course, being impressed by your CV, by your expeditions. But the more that I've gotten to know your content, especially for Overland Journal, it's the stunning images that you've captured. And you have a very unique way of setting the vehicle as a minor character in a very beautiful place. So it's this sense of place that you've captured in your imagery that I find so exceptional. Is photography one of your great loves?
It certainly is. Absolutely, yeah. Jonathan Hansen, whom I believe you know, and I think most people in the expedition world knows, he's always pulling my leg about, because I have got this thing about wide-angle lenses. And I've just got an 8mm Samyang lens, which, you can take a picture of the back of your head just about with this thing. But the optics are superb, and it does give you a truly dynamic and inspiring new view, things that you would not have looked twice at. Take it through a wide-angle, a fisheye lens, and you say, "Hey, look at that!"
Yeah, quite unusual.
Stop it down to f/22 and get the sun sparkle from the sun and all the rest of it. You can include the sun in the shot, because heavens, our whole life is influenced by the sun. Why not put it in the shot? Photography is very much my thing.
Yeah,
very much my thing.
Some of your books that you've produced that that maybe people don't even know about is, like, for example, Quiet for a Tuesday.
Yes.
Which is just it's a beautiful volume and a great title. And then the other one is The Nobility of Wilderness, which is, we just spent some time looking at some photos on your computer from that, and they're just beautiful, truly.
I must admit, you can't take a good photograph unless you're inspired by the subject. And if you have also got a camera that you really chime with technically and physically and functionally, then you won't get anywhere.
Yeah.
But as I say, it's difficult not to be inspired by the desert and photography, particularly with the light you get there, with the sun. When the sun is above, there's one shot I took with a fisheye lens, and it's deliberately pointed up. It wasn't a fisheye lens. It was a very wide angle lens. It was pointed up, so the horizon is curved. There's one vehicle there. The sky, there's a hell of a gradient on the sky going from pale blue right up to dark blue, and the sun is in the shot. And that actually encapsulates, really, in a harsh way, the other angle on the desert,
which is the sun constantly.
You don't fool with that kind of thing, and it really gets a message across.
It does, and your images, they speak to the grandeur of Algeria and Tunisia and Libya, or these places that you've traveled, and so few people have been able to experience. My total time in Algeria was minutes because I had accidentally crossed the border. So I would love to go back, and I would love to spend the time like you have there.
It's terribly sad, the situation in Algeria. Yeah. It really is. I mean, the scenery there is, if you forgive the expression, is to die for. It is, would you hope you wouldn't, but it is just in a class by itself. Gigantic rock outcrops that you get, all smoothed over. You look at it, the mind boggles. You think, what is the temperature gradient of that after 3 months of high summer?
Sure.
What are the thermal stresses in it? And you can see the thermal stresses. They've peeled away. You get an exfoliation at the top. The outer layer cracks away and it slides down to the bottom. And you get all this detritus around the bottom there. But you still got this enormous rock outcrop there. Algeria is in a class by itself.
What an incredible place, truly.
Again, and it isn't all really hot and unbearable, because if you go down to Tamanrasset, for example, you're up in the Hogar Mountains, and the scenery is just spectacular. And the temperature at 5,000 feet, is
very tolerable.
Is lovely. Yeah,
very tolerable.
There's a little monastery there up the road from Tamanrasset, and you climb up, and the monks there must have really enjoyed themselves. I think, because what a place to be.
One of the questions that I really wanted to ask you is that in all of these journeys that you've done, this incredible career of travel, how has that changed you as a person?
I'm not sure that it has changed me as much as reaffirmed me, by which I mean, I think it all started when I was about 10 years old. My father was a tea planter up in the top right-hand corner of India. We came back in 1946 after partition, and on the train from Calcutta to Bombay, it's a long old journey. And overnight journey there. And I woke up at 10 years old, woke up about 5 o'clock in the morning. The rest of the family were asleep. And I looked out of the window. We were in the desert at that time. And that really did it.
Yeah,
that really did it for me. It nailed it. Yeah. And it's been the same ever since, I think. Yeah.
The deserts can do that for us.
Yeah. The space, the cleanliness. I mean, there's a line in the Lawrence of Arabia, where an inspirational film, where Lawrence says, "God, I love this place."
Yeah.
And he really got it when he's on his camel, singing on his camel and echoing off the mountains in Aqaba. It's like nowhere else.
Yeah,
and that actually is where the Algerians, I think, have got to be careful how they handle it. I don't want to sound exclusive or anything, but you don't want, how can I put this tactfully? No, I can't put it tactfully. You don't want a noisy rabble going into the desert and leaving litter. You want people who really appreciate the beauty of the place.
Respect it.
And I respect it. Yeah.
It seems like that those formative experiences that we have in our youth, and for you were able to do what you were meant to do.
As I say, that was the impression formed on that train coming out from the east of Bombay, and it stayed with me ever since. And I flew some transport command as a supernumerary pilot initially, flying over the desert, and you look down and that is absolutely tear-jerking. It really is. You see the dawn coming up and the long shadows cast by the dunes and everything. And the first time I flew over Jebel Uwayna out Nasser's Corner, that mountain on the bot there, it reduced me to tears. It really was beautiful, absolutely beautiful.
And a special thanks to Onyx Off-Road for helping to support this week's podcast. Going further on your adventures is about having the right tools. The Onyx Off-Road app's intuitive maps make it easy to find trails and disperse camping, and their offline maps give you full GPS navigation capability without cell coverage. I'm also really excited about their new route builder for planning and sharing custom trips. It's got a snap to trail tool where you can just drop points where you want to go and a route automatically connects to the closest road or trail. You can build, save, and add routes to folders and share your entire trip with your buddies. You can find out more information on onyxmaps.com. You can also find their apps in the Apple Store or whatever other device that you use. Thanks again, Onyx.
You've had the opportunity to drive many different vehicles, and which, everything from these original Range Rovers to Ford controls to Defenders and G-Wagons and everything else. Which one was your favorite? Not the one that necessarily worked the best, but the one that you just loved.
Oh, I think unquestionably the G-Wagon. When I got my G-Wagon, which would have been around 2000, they were making the G-Wagon 461 as a van. So it got this immaculately conceived driveline, which was a lockable front diff, lockable back differential, change on the move. Please God, make every vehicle capable of doing that. You could change on the move from low range to high range. Essential when you're getting out of really soft sand, and you cannot then stop to fiddle about with gear levers. So it had all the driveline functionality that you needed. Plus it was a van, and it would carry a ton and a bit. That, I think, tops the list. Coming up remarkably close, I'm just thinking of that original Range Rover. That original Range Rover I had was a development vehicle. We've got to give it some space, some there.
Grace there,
like broken track rods and think and the fuel pump went in. Oh my God, not what you do. But that had potential. Again, sadly, like the G-Wagon, it's gone down the money-grubbing route of producing a over-specified luxury vehicle for people who never even dare go off-road. But that Range Rover had the potential to be a winner, but it wasn't. The next one down, I would say, the next honest vehicle, surprisingly for many people listening to this, is the Jeep Renegade Trailhawk 2-liter diesel. A very modest-looking vehicle. It looks like an ordinary sort of school-run wagon. But my word, the only thing it lacks is it could do with a bit more ground clearance. But the gem of that is, and understated and unrewarded and unrecognized, is the ZF automatic transmission. It's got a transverse engine, so you got very little in the way of space. I went round the G-Wagon factory, and there were the chassis there being laid out, and they said, this is the one with the new 7-speed. The 7-speed transmission was about this long. And I thought, wow, terrific. And it was practically colliding with the rear axle. What they've done in the Renegade is produce a 9-speed gearbox, 12 inches wide. And you think that is impossible. This is ZF. Nobody ever says, hey, ZF, terrific. They should do. They should haul up the flag for ZF.
That is a good transmission.
because it is absolutely outstanding.
Yeah.
There was an initial production problem when they had to transfer, for numbers, transfer production to a USA, because it didn't go right to start with. But the basic design is there, as produced by ZF, and then they got the production up to it.
And then the traction control and all of that works quite well.
It does.
Yeah.
It's got a diff lock. It hasn't got a front diff lock, but it's got a locking diff in the middle. In effect, it is an 8-speed usable range of gears. In point of fact, more like 7, because you come out of the garage and 100 yards down the road, it's in 3rd gear.
Yeah, sure.
It starts off in 2nd. 1st is kept for high days and holidays and sand that's that deep.
Sure.
And you can lock the rear diff. You can go into full-time four-wheel drive. It will revert to 4x2 all on its own. It's got everything is selectable, beautifully ergonomically placed and written and laid out.
Oh, that's wonderful praise for the vehicle. I like them. They're quite space efficient. They're a little box.
Oh, yes.
A little box with wheels, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I've taken the back seat out of mine. And when I took it to Algeria, I took the back seat out and I did a fairly comprehensive platform mod inside. 4 jerry cans of fuel, 2 jerry cans of water, whole lot of storage, little things, cupboards that lift up and all the rest of it. And I can sleep in it as well. In the UK, when it's cold, I can put the passenger seat forward and I can put a sleeping bag inside. And even when it's cold outside, you just crack the windows down a little bit to get out. Beautiful.
Perfect.
Beautiful.
The thing that I remember about the G-Wagon the last time that I was here was how minimal the modifications were to it.
Yes.
You had things that you had learned over 40 years that worked in the desert. And I think it's helpful to kind of work through some of those things. One of the things that stood out to me was you did have a backup battery, but it was connected with a manual switching separator.
Yes.
What's your motivation, or what inspired you to go about it that way?
I can't clearly remember. It will probably have been the fact that I didn't have the sensitive equipment required to know when to switch from the main battery to the backup battery.
Yeah, it was so simple and reliable. It was just behind the driver's seat.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's
Quite
right.
clever.
I'm trying to remember what was running off it. A lot of things. Oh, that's right. The interior lighting.
Yeah, and I think your GPS ran off
and
it.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. The navigation equipment and the interior lighting.
And then you had this other very clever roof-mounted, kind of ventilation system that you installed on the roof, and it just would kind of ram air into the cabin.
That's right.
Very clever.
And I've done it, and we've got pictures of that. I did initially on a Land Rover, 90-inch Land Rover, just a hood. Basically, I was using the air that had to hit this very steep windscreen and go up the windscreen.
Sure.
And that's all it had to do. So you never got rain going into it. But so the intake was actually horizontal like that. So the air went in there, and then a couple of eyeball things in it. No
worked.
Power, no fan, no nothing. And it was fantastic.
Yeah, very simple. And then when you camp in the desert, I don't know if this is something that you still do, but in some of your photographs, it shows you sleeping on a cot. Is that your preference?
Yes. Yeah. Well, practical terms, you couldn't sleep in the vehicle because it was full of jerry cans and things like that. I was loath to clobber up the roof with heavy drag-inducing rooftop tents and things like that, from which you couldn't see anyway.
Yeah, sure.
The joy of sitting on a cot, a camp bed, which only about that far off the ground, is that you could turn over. I always slept with my feet facing south.
Okay.
So I would find that the constellations went over like this.
Oh.
So I could wake up in that. I didn't need to look at my watch. I knew where the plough was, or some of the other constellations. I could say, oh yeah, it's about, I've got another couple of hours to go here. And absolute magic. And to just open your eyes and see the stars. It's a shame to close your eyes, actually.
Yeah.
And in the moonlight, of course, it was just unbelievable.
So those are the rewards of not locking yourself away in a tent or in the vehicle.
Yeah.
And the desert really lends itself well. One of the things that I do like about sleeping out under the stars is on the occasion that you get a little bit of rain, you hear that it's amazing how we're still, through evolution, we know that sound, that little pitter-patter of the rain.
Absolutely right.
And we wake up quite easily from that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
it's so special.
In fact, one time on a trip with the Range Rover and the trailer, which was logistically and practically challenging, shall we say. It was so windy one night, I couldn't sleep on the ground because I was being part of a sand dune. So I perched my mattress, strapped my mattress to the top of the trailer. I was chuckling all the time. I said, this could not get any worse.
Yeah.
I slept on top of the trailer on the mattress. And then halfway through the night, it pitter-patter, pitter-patter. And I don't believe this. Yeah. But having said that, even I've slept out in the UK in temperate zones, unquote. Where you're liable to get rain anyway, and there's a waterproof sleeping bag you can get into.
Sure,
and it's fine. You just button it down and you say, okay, rain away, get on there.
The next thing that I was hoping to talk about was the Vehicle Dependent Expedition Guide. You're on what edition now?
6.
Edition
Sorry,
6.
Well, it's the 6th edition, sort of. I suppose really it's probably the 7th, but it is called Edition 5A.
Yeah.
Because I made some very small additions to take care of issues with the Garmin, careful as I say this, Garmin nav equipment, which we'd had given trouble. And I wanted to straighten things out because the trouble looked worse than it was.
Sure.
If you could identify what was giving trouble, and that was completely separate from the accuracy of the navigation, which is what was the important bit.
Yeah,
so my message was, it's fine. It's working off satellites up there, which are absolutely spot on.
Yeah.
But some of the onboard equipment inevitably is not so expensively engineered as a satellite is. And you've got the bit that matters. So I wanted to incorporate that in the thing. And also a glancing blow. I mean, at the very, very early days yet, but I had to mention the Rivian electric pickup, which at the time was, and that was about 9 months ago now, at the time was the only sort of sensible. Rivian seemed to have addressed the right things.
Yes.
But it's still heavy. And my caveat was, what about the tires?
Yeah.
You get this big, heavy vehicle. Okay, it's got the power weight ratio, but has it got the tires? The tires don't seem to have caught up. Now, it may well be that Mr. Rivian is saying, I couldn't agree more, and I wouldn't mind some 900 by 16s on this rather than 750s. But nevertheless, it's similar. Plus, of course, you can't take jerry cans with an electric vehicle.
Yeah, there's limitations to it. Having driven the Rivian for many months, it's exceptional. It would give you a laugh for sure.
Yeah, some fresh thinking there. Yeah. Really, I'd be very interested in your view.
Yeah, it's a very special vehicle, and we took a Rivian SUV to the most remote point that you can travel to on a road in North America. And it had just enough range to do that. And they really are quite capable. To your point, though, the sand would be its nemesis because
of the weight.
They're almost 9,000 pounds, and it's a 20-inch wheel. So you can only air them down so far.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. With a thin tire on it. That's the thing. They want bigger wheel arches, and the wheel and tire industry needs to catch up with this issue. If they're going to go, which they will have to, they're going to have to address, off-road vehicles with electric. When you say you went to the extreme of range, were you a nervous wreck when you were getting near home?
It's range anxiety. It's a thing. You really, because there's not an easy way to solve it.
No.
With an internal combustion vehicle, you can even stick your thumb out and maybe a rancher comes by that has some extra fuel.
Yeah.
Or you can take a jerry can and go into the town and come back with fuel.
Yeah.
With the electric vehicle, it requires a very specialized solution.
That's
which has
right,
to be
What sort of range were you on that trip?
We did almost 200 miles of off-road driving.
So it's 100 out and 100 back?
No, it was 100 out, and then we took a slightly different route to go out. The one advantage that the electric vehicles have that's really interesting is its ability to regen. So anytime you're going downhill, you're actually getting energy back into the battery, which is quite interesting. It's something that an internal combustion vehicle can't do. Of course, the consumption goes way down, but the engine's still purring along and it's not putting power back into the vehicle.
But is that not just a question of putting back what you lost going up the hill?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And of course, there's some overall loss, just because it does take a lot more energy to go uphill than the regen can provide going down.
Sure.
But it's a new technology and it's fascinating. I mean, it's not going to be the solution to cross the Sahara yet. Maybe someday, but not yet.
Everybody writes about that we're waiting for the big battery breakthrough.
Yeah.
And I think that's it, isn't it, really, to get the weight down.
At some point,
they're getting very much better than they were, aren't they?
They really are. They keep getting more and more refined around that, for sure.
Yeah.
I think that it's been fun to watch the vehicle-dependent expedition guide continue to get updated, because the first volume was so significant and substantial that a lot of times those kinds of books never get kept up to date. Whereas between you and Jonathan's help, you've been able to keep, for those that are listening, Jonathan Hansen, who's involved with the Overland Expo and 7P International, he helps
absolutely with invaluable help there, and a solid perspective on some of the things that I'm saying.
Yeah, he's very accomplished.
I said, "Hey, Jonathan, what do you think?" And he says, he's very tactful there.
Oh yeah, of course. He's a true gentleman and a great ambassador for what we love to do.
Absolutely, yeah.
So Jonathan is included in some of the newer volumes of the book.
Yes, indeed, yeah.
So one of the things that I find is so interesting about the book is that you do go into a lot of detail around the supporting equipment. So clothing, cooking, sleeping, shipping. You go into all of these supportive logistical components of vehicle-based travel. So those that are listening, I would highly encourage that you go, it's desertwinds.com, is that right? And take a look at the book. I think Jonathan and Roseanne might still have some copies available.
Yeah, I was particularly pleased, actually. Got a bit carried away. Actually, I spent a time in the Air Force as a test pilot, and alongside the arrangements at Farnborough was Aeromed Center for the RAF, and one got terribly analytical about everything there and about clothing and for pilots and so on and so forth. That caused me to rather go to town on the clothing side of things. And I was very pleased. I wondered if I'd overdone it, actually. I was very pleased, though, to hear from somebody in the clothing industry who said, "Hey, look, this is okay."
Well, and it helped. I think it helped me, and I think many others, inform a good baseline of decision making around equipment. The other thing that I really like about your vehicle-dependent expedition guide is it shows mostly stock vehicles accomplishing these significant feats. So it reminds people that you don't really need to, nor should you heavily modify a vehicle for long expeditions. Has that been your experience? You want to avoid heavy modifications?
The manufacturers have a problem on their hands. Like the new Land Rovers, for example. When I heard it was coming out, I almost ordered one blind. But when I saw it, I thought, oh my Lord, it's about 20% bigger than I would want. Isn't ideal it'll do an expedition, but it doesn't have a front diff lock. And you've got to be realistic and say, well, the guys who are paying the bills for this thing at the factory and putting in all the design work, the production equipment and everything, they've got to get that money back. So they've got to sell a lot of these things. So they've got to sell to a lot of people, not just the expedition people. So things like that have rather lowered its expedition capability, I think. But to answer your question about modifications, I think in general, any kind of long range or even medium range expedition, you're talking about taking out the back seats and using that for cargo, unless it's very short range. Now, also there are, if you're not strapped for payload, if you're not really pushed for payload or up to your neck in jerry cans of fuel and everything, you've probably got the payload to have a roof tent or something like that. And in the so-called temperate zones, you could have a roof tent and get into it, and you're out of the way of insects, snakes, and that kind of stuff, and you're protected from the rain and that kind of. Plus, you can peep out, and say it's not very nice out there. Put it down again. So yeah, it's kind of horses for courses. I think anything long range, I would say yes, you have to do modifications. Anything short range or medium range, you could probably add accessories, provided they're not too heavy. I have a thing about external add-ons.
Yeah.
Being realistic about it, and people with families and that kind of thing. Then a roof tent is very, provided again the weather is not too windy. You see these pictures in advertisements on the back of magazines, and there's people there. We know they've got the vehicle with the bedroom upstairs, and there's a huge awning. And I think if the wind goes above 5 knots, this whole lot is going to finish off now.
With you in it, maybe, huh?
Yeah, which happened to me in the desert with my good friend Jeff. It was very warm indeed. It was about 44 centigrade, but dry. Yeah. So it wasn't as bad as it sounded. But we thought, I think we'll where the hell are we going to camp tonight? And so we said, well, let's camp up on that hill there. So we camped up on the hill to catch the breeze.
Yeah, sure.
As we said, and before you could say boo, there was a whirlwind coming up, which we unloaded a lot of kit at that stage, then the wind then distributed over the surrounding countryside.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I mean, these adverts are all very well, but what about when the wind blows?
Yeah. No, conditions can change very quickly.
Yeah, that's right.
Which is why a lot of times sleeping inside the vehicle is your best choice.
That's
if
right.
You have room for it.
Yeah.
You have room for it.
I had a Suzuki Jimny.
Yeah, those are fun.
What a sweetie.
Yeah.
What a little sweetie.
Yeah.
I mean, it looks like Son of G-Wagon.
It does.
The look of it.
It does.
It's an awful shame. It came to the UK, and I thought I would have bought one. Unfortunately, the petrol version didn't accord with our emission laws, and that kind of, and also the gearbox, the automatic gearbox, wasn't just the top of the range there.
No,
it was nominally 4. It was more like 3, which in practice turned out like 2.
Yeah, that was my experience.
If they'd put a really economical, low emissions engine in it and a decent a ZF gearbox, that would have been the catch for jam. The thing about it was, small as it was, you could sleep in it, no problem at all.
Yeah.
Why? Because both seats, but certainly the passenger seat back, fold backwards, not forwards.
Sure.
Which I had to do in the Jeep. You have the back goes forward, so you're actually sleeping at an angle like that. In the Jimny, it goes towards the back of the vehicle, so you can sleep on it, and it's long enough to take a 6-footer, no problem at all.
Fantastic.
And you've got all this light around. You just crack the windows down about that much to get air share through. Beautiful.
Yeah, so good.
Absolute gem of a vehicle, that one.
So for someone that is new to overland travel, what would be a couple pieces of advice that you would give them? Someone that was getting ready to start their own journey like you have.
Ooh. Know what you don't know.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to ask. Yeah. Don't be afraid to be persistent in getting decent explanations about things. Above all, have an eye for detail. If someone accuses you of being a granny or a nitpicker, say, that's fine. That's what it's about.
Yeah, and it'll get you home.
Because it's the detail that really counts.
Absolutely. No, that's great advice, Tom. Thank you.
Yeah, that's right.
You still have the Jeep?
Yes.
And have you put any thought to your next adventure that you'd like to do?
It's difficult. As I say, politically, where can you go?
Yeah.
But I want to go.
Sure.
I would love to go back to Algeria.
Yeah.
But it just is not, for various reasons,
doesn't work.
To do with here and prevailing circumstances, that it's not going to happen, I don't think. But in the meantime, I've got it. I admire the engineering and the humble elegance of the design. Round headlights.
Yes.
Remember round headlights?
Yes. What a gem.
Which sort of is like saying, hey, we're not carried away by this cheap fashion stuff.
Tom, thank you so much for taking the time with me today. It's been an absolute joy to hear about your adventures, to share your story with our audience. I would highly encourage those that are listening, take a look and see if you can find a vehicle-dependent expedition guide for yourself. It is an incredible volume. We have all called it the Bible of overlanding for a very long time. And it's a deserving attribute.
Oh, you're very kind. And this companion book is 4x4 driving, which
is quite good.
Hasn't required, because these are tenets which are sort of hallowed. Yes. Well, thank you for having me, and I hope I haven't bent your ears too much.
No, I wish that we could spend all day recording this, because there's so much to learn from you, Tom. You've been such an inspiration for me. You've reminded me of the importance of planning and logistics. And I've referred to your book throughout all of my expeditions around the world, or my adventures around the world. And I'm just so grateful that we could spend the time today.
Scott, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.